Welcome everybody to Q Plus EDU. We are so excited you're here with us today. We are super thrilled that you are joining us for Know Your Rights Trivia. My name is Frederick. My pronouns are they, them. I am OutYouth's Texas GSA Network Coordinator, and I will be here doing the recording and tech aspects today, and I'm going to pass it over to E, who will be moderating the chat.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm E. I use they, them pronouns. I am the founder of Q Plus EDU. And like Frederick said, I am here to moderate the chat. So if questions get asked, I'll look for those. We always welcome questions and we'll try to get to them at the end of this presentation. Also, throughout this, I will be dropping all of the resources and any links that are mentioned in the chat as well. So with that, I will turn it over to our presenters.
Everybody, welcome. So tonight we're going to be doing a Know Your Rights trivia presentation. My name is Trayshawn Pate. I'm with the ACLU of Texas. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And this is my colleague, Brian.
Hey everyone, Brian Klosterboer. My pronouns are he, him, his. Good to be with you all.
Right. I'm going to quickly share my screen right quick and we'll get started. All right, perfect. Oops, sorry. Okay. So, like I said, my name is Trayshawn Pate. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I am a policy and advocacy strategist with the ACLU of Texas. We are looking forward to doing a Know Your Rights trivia with you all today. Hopefully, we can learn a couple of things as we go along here. But remember, the key of this is not to necessarily get every answer correct. It is a learning experience, so hopefully we can just have some fun. All right, and I'm not sure if you all have heard of the ACLU of Texas before, but we're actually a nonprofit, nonpartisan legal and policy organization. We just turned 100 years old this year. We've been around since 1920, and our mission is to defend and expand the rights granted to us by the Constitution. So a couple of the issue areas that we work on at the ACLU of Texas is we work on, I apologize. So we work on LGBTQ rights, voting rights, immigration rights, as well as criminal justice reform, or what we call our smart justice. Today, we're going to actually be focusing on LGBTQ students' rights in schools, but the same rules and laws that apply to LGBTQ students are also going to apply across the board to many other groups of people in schools as well. So before we jump into the trivia, we wanted to let you know about a resource that you can always reach out to us. If you have any questions about any issues that you may be having, at the end, we'll actually show our email addresses and our website at the ACLUoftexas.org. But we also wanted to show a special website dedicated to the rights of trans and non-binary students called texastranskids.org. You can find information about this, or you can find out more information and also use this as a referral service if you want to speak to an attorney or an advocate about LGBTQ rights in Texas schools. All right, so let's get started. We're going to dive into trivia questions. Really quick, if you all want to follow along or play with us, you can go to aclutexas.org/trivia, and that will actually bring up a form where you can fill out the top part of that with your name, your email address, and your zip code. And the bottom half of that form will be the trivia questions. We'll actually have trivia broken up into two different parts. So the first part is going to be on LGBTQ students' rights in schools. And then the second part is going to be on protesting and knowing your rights around that. Again, aclutexas.org if you want to go ahead and follow along with us. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and get started with some questions. And yeah. All right, so this first round is going to focus specifically on issues facing LGBTQ students and what their rights are in schools. We're going to ask 8 different questions, and then we'll review at the end, and we'll go over the answers at that time. So again, aclutexas.org/trivia, and you can actually fill out these trivia score or your trivia card with us. And if you turn that back into us, we can also get some prizes out to the winners. All right, so question number 1. LGBTQ students in Texas schools have the rights that come primarily from A, Texas state laws, including statewide non-discrimination protections. B, Texas administrative laws, including regulations from Texas Education Agency. C, federal laws, including Title IX, the Equal Access Act, and the 14th Amendment. Or D, court decisions from the Supreme Court and Fifth Circuit. I'll give you just a couple of seconds to fill out your form. All right. On to question number 2. Teachers and administrators in Texas schools are required to call transgender and non-binary students by their A, affirming name and pronouns if the student has legally changed their name and updated their gender marker. B, affirming name and pronouns regardless of whether the student has legally changed their name or updated their gender marker. C, name and pronouns based on the student's birth certificate. Or D, name and pronouns found in school district records. Give you a couple seconds to fill in your answers. All right, on to question 3. Some school districts have dress and grooming codes that treat male and female students differently, such as requirement that male students but not female students wear short hair. These policies disproportionately affect A, Black and Native American students, B, students from different religious backgrounds like Sikh and Rastafarian and Jewish, or C, transgender and non-binary students, or D, all of the above. On to question number 4. A public school district cannot prevent you from doing any of the following except A, bringing a date to prom who is the same gender as you, B, bringing LGBTQ pride flags to school whenever you want, C, running for homecoming court in your affirming gender, D, writing a paper for a history project on transgender activists like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson. On to question number 5. Which of the following can school do to regulate a gender sexuality alliance? A, require a GSA to apply for funding like other clubs. B, ask the GSA to change its name to something less conspicuous like Spectrum. C, require parental permission for students to join the GSA. Or D, require pre-approval from all the content and discussions at the GSA. Question number 6. Courts across the country have almost unanimously found that transgender students have the right to A, be called by their affirming name and pronouns, B, use the bathroom and locker room that aligns with their gender identity, C, not be outed as transgender or have their private information disclosed to their peers, or D, all of the above. On to question number 7. Transgender and non-binary students in Texas currently have the right to participate in UIL sports based on A, their current gender, B, their sex assigned at birth, C, the sex currently listed on their birth certificate, or D, the sex according to a doctor or therapist. All right, now the final question for this particular round. Question number 8. Every school district in the state has policies protecting students from bullying, cyberbullying, and harassment based on A, sex, gender, sex stereotypes, and real or perceived sexual orientation, B, sex, gender, and sex stereotypes, C, sex and gender, or D, sex. All right, give you a couple seconds to fill in your forms. And we're going to pause there for just a second and let you all submit your answers for round 1. So again, on ACLU.texas.org/trivia, you all can fill out your forms and follow along with us as we proceed. Now my colleague Brian is going to actually come forward and review the answers for this particular round.
Thanks so much, Trayshawn, and great job. Yeah, everyone, you want to go ahead and submit your form. You'll actually use the same form, so you can, you can still see the questions for number 9 through 16, but you can just go ahead and submit now if you want, and then you can reload that same form for round 2. So go ahead and submit, and then we're now going to go over the answers. Cool. All right. Question 1 is, where do LGBTQ students' rights come from? The correct answer, or the most correct answer, is C, federal laws. So currently Texas, the reason that A is not the correct answer is that Texas has some laws that could be helpful, but we still lack explicit statewide non-discrimination protections. So a lot of groups like Equality Texas, the Transgender Education Network of Texas, and other groups are really pushing for explicit statewide protections in Texas laws. Some other states have laws that protect LGBTQ students, but we don't yet really have those comprehensive laws. Same thing for the TEA, the Texas Education Agency. There are some rules that are protective, but not fully. Where we see the most rights coming in is really from federal courts based on federal laws. So even last month, we're going to talk about a little bit later, there was a landmark Supreme Court case affirming the rights of LGBTQ people to be free from employment discrimination. And that same landmark case, Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia, also expands protections for LGBTQ students because it's a very similar statute. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's the main source. D, also, while there's some case law, the Texas Supreme Court and Fifth Circuit have not been very helpful thus far. There are some really bad and anti-transgender cases that have come out of the Fifth Circuit especially, but thankfully, the Supreme Court and other federal courts have had some really good case law. So next slide. So number 2, so the correct answer is that teachers and administrators in Texas schools are required by federal law to call transgender and non-binary students by B, their affirming name and pronouns, regardless of whether the student has legally updated or corrected their name and gender marker. So this is a common misconception that even a lot of schools don't always understand, or principals and teachers. They don't realize that across the country, a lot of federal courts have found that deliberately refusing to use someone's affirming and correct name and gender markers constitutes gender-based harassment that the courts have held. So it doesn't even matter if you haven't actually been able to go through the process to go to state court to legally update your name and gender marker in all your documents. Even if your name in the school district records on your birth certificate is still your dead name or the name assigned you had at birth, the school has an obligation to honor what you want to be called and to make sure that your gender is affirmed and respected. Next slide. Number 3, so this is a big issue right now with dress and grooming codes. I don't know if any of you have heard about DeAndre Arnold and his cousin Caden Bradford. They're 2 Black students who live in Mont Belvieu, Texas, outside of Houston. And they both were essentially kicked out of school for wearing locks, their natural black hair. And some school districts across the state still have really antiquated and outdated policies that treat students differently based on sex. So they'll have one dress code for male students, one dress code for female students, and they'll say things like, well, male students have to wear short hair, they can't go above their ear, collar, or eyebrows, but female students can wear long hair. So that's facially discriminatory. On its face, it's treating students differently, but also it's having a disparate impact on other groups, especially Black and Native American students, people who wear their hair longer for religious reasons, people from different faith backgrounds, and especially transgender and non-binary students. So this is an issue that the ACLU of Texas is actively working on and fighting against these discriminatory dress codes. we do have a lot of helpful developments, like the Supreme Court case I mentioned from last month actually also talked about a dress code. The transgender woman there, Amy Stevens, who was fired from her job, the employer tried to say, oh, we're not firing you for being transgender. You're just not following the dress code, that our dress code requires you to come to work based on your sex assigned at birth. Thankfully, the Supreme Court found that that was discrimination, sex discrimination, and we're making those same arguments across the state. So this is one of those areas at the end, we'll talk about how to get in touch with us. But especially if you're seeing dress code discrimination, please reach out to us, because this is one of those issues we're actively working on. Next slide. All right. Number 4. So this is a public school district cannot prevent, sorry, this question, I apologize, is a little bit, it's like a double negative, so it's kind of poorly worded. We'll rephrase it next time. So the school district cannot prevent you from doing any of the following things, except the answer is B. It's a little bit of a trick question, because you actually do have a right to bring LGBTQ pride flags to school, but not necessarily whenever you want. So school districts can have neutral and fair policies that don't discriminate based on the content of what you're bringing to school. So if they have a policy that says you can't bring any flags to school, or you can't bring just like any paraphernalia like a flag, and it's equally applied, then that might be okay. But if your school doesn't have a policy forbidding that, you actually can bring LGBTQ pride flags to school. Like if you're allowed to bring a flag to a football game, you could bring a pride flag as well. You could bring the trans flag, the bisexual flag, any of those flags. And also importantly, all these other things are allowed under the law. So a school district cannot stop you from bringing a date to prom who's the same gender as you. They can't stop you from running for homecoming court in your affirming gender. I will say this is also an area that's actively changing. A lot of students like yourselves and people who are supportive understand that gender is not a binary, and that a lot of these things like homecoming court or powder puff football are outdated and antiquated and don't take into account, and they're not gender inclusive as they should be. So we're seeing a lot of student activists across the state say, why does homecoming court have to have a king and a queen, or a prince and a princess? Why can't we have it be gender neutral? And so that's something people are pushing for changing too. And then on the last point, the history project, you also have a right within the confines of an assignment. So if your teacher says write about, or write a poem, it's okay to write about LGBT issues in the poem, or write a history paper, you can do it as long as it fits the assignment. Then you have a right to still bring up LGBT issues. Next slide. So GSAs. So this is about really asking about the Federal Equal Access Act is the federal law that allows for GSA, it requires that GSAs be treated equally, the same as other student groups. So if your school allows what's called non-curricular clubs, so curricular clubs are things like the math club, chess club, or science club. But the non-curricular clubs would be things like any other club, whether it's a faith-based religious club or a GSA or just like a dance club or something else. Then they will, then they have to treat these equally as the same as other groups. So A is the correct answer. The school can require the GSA to apply for funding just like other clubs, but they can't discriminate against the GSA in other ways. They can't force you to change your name because they're embarrassed about the words gender and sexuality. They can't require parental permission, and they can't pre-approve or censor the content, just like other clubs. Next slide. So this one, courts across the country have almost unanimously found that transgender students have the right to be all of the above. So we talked about names and pronouns earlier, that the case law on this is really, really strong. You're also looking at a picture of Gavin Grimm, and I don't know if you can read the quote, but he's talking about his fight for all trans youth. And thanks to people like Gavin who have fought in these courtrooms, almost every single transgender student like Gavin who has brought a case has won across the country. In the last 5 years, we have seen an enormous shift in the case law. The whole like bathroom argument is something that anti-LGBT groups are still raising, but they have almost resoundingly lost in court. There are even these kind of, I call them like fake privacy lawsuits, that the parents of cisgender students in places like Oregon have tried to file a lawsuit on behalf of their cisgender child, saying that they have a right to privacy, and that right actually can exclude transgender people from using the same bathroom or locker room. So they're saying the very presence of having a student who's trans in the same space as their child is hurting their constitutional rights. It's a completely discriminatory and ridiculous argument, and thankfully the courts have resoundingly rejected it. So people like Gavin have been winning these cases all across the country. Sadly, we don't have any case like that directly here in Texas. It's like directly binding on our school districts. So in Texas, one of the resources we have that we mentioned, the txtranskids.org website, if you or someone you know is discriminated against or being denied equal and affirming bathroom or locker room access, you can reach out to us, and we have attorneys who are happy to help you resolve those situations. Often here in Texas, it's kind of a negotiation where we'll go to the school district and ask for whatever access you prefer. So some students prefer full and equal affirming access to like the multi-user facilities, and we push for that when that's what clients want. Some people do prefer to use a single user restroom for different safety reasons or personal preference. That is the option that some of the more like conservative school districts are most comfortable with. Like almost never, we never see districts, like no one thinks that a student should be forced to use the wrong non-affirming multi-user facilities. So thankfully, at minimum, even like some of the more conservative school districts are offering at least a single user facility, but that's still often discriminatory and ostracizing. For students to have to be separated from all of their friends and treated differently is separate and not equal. So we push back on that. And thanks to people like Gavin, we're winning these cases across the country. So the law is improving rapidly. And then people also have a right, number C, not to be outed. So courts have also found that your status and your gender identity is personal medical information that the school can't disclose without your permission. So a teacher or a principal or nurse is not supposed to tell other students, hey, so-and-so is trans. That's a huge invasion of your privacy and not okay. Next slide. So transgender and non-binary students in Texas currently have a right to participate in UIL sports based on C, the sex currently listed on their birth certificate. So this is based currently on UIL rules. This is not what we think the law should be, or even the federal laws. But the UIL policies currently only allow people to participate in like gender-specific sports activities based on the sex currently on their birth certificate. So on the left, you have a picture of two track athletes, Terry Miller and Andrea Yearwood in Connecticut. And then on the right, there's a picture of Mac Beggs. He's a wrestler from here in Texas. He's now in college, but when he was in high school, he was an amazing, and he still is an amazing wrestler, and he won the Texas State Championship. But he was forced to compete based on the sex on his birth certificate, which listed female at the time. So it's hugely discriminatory for these athletes not to be allowed to participate and compete based on their gender. So that's what we believe, that students should be able to compete based on their gender identity and their truly held sense of self. But this policy currently is discriminatory. And I think some people also don't realize, especially some of the anti-transgender groups, that people do update and change the sex on their birth certificate as well. So I mentioned that in Texas, you can go to court and get a court order to update the gender marker on your birth certificate. Often it helps if you have a doctor or therapist letter to support that court petition, but you don't have to have any surgery, any treatment, anything. The court can just issue that order. And so the transgender students are competing. So in Connecticut, Terry and Andrea here were able to compete in their correct and affirming gender. But anti-transgender groups are now really pushing back on this. They've resoundingly lost the bathroom arguments, and they're moving into sports as their kind of area of attack. So this is something we expect in the next legislative session. It's an issue that we're still trying to educate people on. A lot of the groups that are really fighting, so they're claiming that it hurts the fairness of the game to allow transgender athletes to participate and compete. But it's very disingenuous, because a lot of these groups, they don't care about women's sports. So they're especially attacking trans women. And they historically, a lot of these groups have even been opposed to Title IX, which is the law that grants equal funding for women's sports. And so they're trying to argue about the fairness and saying that they really care about this inherent fairness of the game, but it's like, it's both biologically wrong, incredibly discriminatory, and disingenuous, because the point of sports is not just about winning, it's also about participating equally, especially in schools, growing, developing, being with your friends. So there's so many reasons why this push is problematic, and we really need all of your help to be like educating and informing people that this kind of pushback against trans athletes is very discriminatory, and we should be ensuring that sports are gender inclusive and equal. And we don't even always have to have a gender binary in every sport. Like it's ridiculous. So a lot of us know that there are people who are intersex, that people who are non-binary. And so we don't need to have everything being so gendered. And it's just a blatant attack since they're losing some of their other arguments. They're moving into this. So sorry that was a long rant. Next slide. All right, so this is every school district in the state actually has policies that protect students from bullying, cyberbullying, and harassment based on A, sex, gender, sex stereotypes, and real or perceived sexual orientation. So currently, not every school district has agreed to not discriminate themselves based on gender identity and sexual orientation, but in their policies on gender-based harassment and bullying, they uniformly have really helpful language. So if you're ever bullied or harassed based on your gender, your gender identity, sexual orientation, even though gender identity is not explicitly listed, the fact that failure to conform to sex stereotypes is explicitly listed, so there's a very strong argument that everyone is protected. All right, I'll turn it back over to you, Trey.
All right, thank you so much, Brian. That was awesome. All right, so as we move into round two, just a reminder again, you can pull up that same form on aclutexas.org/trivia. And I'll give you all just a second to do that. All right, so for round two, we're going to focus on free speech, right to protest, and what to do if your rights are violated. Again, it's going to be 8 questions, and afterwards we're going to review the questions, and you all can submit, and yeah, we'll go from there. All right, so question number 1 in round 2, or question number 9. The landmark Supreme Court case that established students' rights to free speech in schools was A, Obergefell versus Hodges, B, New York Times versus Sullivan, C, San Antonio Independent School District versus Rodriguez, or D, Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District. I'll give you all a couple of seconds to fill in your answers. We should have like some Jeopardy music playing for these. All right, question number 10. Schools cannot punish students for A, saying the F word in the middle of class, B, screaming fire in gym class, C, wearing a t-shirt that says gay okay on it, or D, calling a student a homophobic slur. All right, on to question 11. If a student posts comments on Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, or any other social media platform outside of school hours, a public school district, A, cannot take any action against them because anything the student says is protected by the First Amendment. B, can only take action to address cyberbullying against other students. C, can only take action to address cyberbullying against other students or to respond to threats against teachers and staff. Or D, can take action against any speech that causes a substantial disruption to the school environment. Ooh, these are getting hard. Nice. All right, on to question 12. Students at your school have the right to all of the following except A, passing out Bibles and other religious materials to their friends, B, using religion to ban LGBTQ groups from campus. C, leading a prayer or meditation in a club or student group. Or D, doing a historical report on the Buddha, I cannot pronounce that, Siddhartha, or another religious figure. Give you just a few seconds to fill in your answers. All right, on to question 13. If you organize a protest or walk out at your school that causes you to miss class, you, A, cannot be punished, B, can be punished the same as if you miss class for any other reason, C, can only be punished if you didn't tell the school about the protest beforehand, or D, can be punished for missing class and organizing the protest. Just a few seconds to fill in your answers. Question number 14. If you are bullied or harassed by other students, you should not A, record a document that happens. Record a document what happens. B, fight back and call these students names. C, tell a school official what happened. Or D, look for allies and friends who will support you. Give you a few seconds to fill in your answers. All right, on to question number 15. In every Texas public school district, you have a right to all the following except A, file an official complaint or discrimination and have a hearing with your principal. B, protest and disrupt a school board meeting to change school district policies. C, record video if you are in a public space and allowed to use your phone. Or D, criticize your school's policies and practices on the internet and in the media. Question number 16. If you are continually facing problems at your school and feel that you are being discriminated against, you should A, research what your rights are so that you can advocate for yourself. B, read your student handbook and your school district policies to make sure that you do not miss any deadlines. C, contact the ACLU of Texas or an adult, teacher, or parent that you trust for assistance. Or D, all of the above. On to question 17, or actually, that's going to be the last question in this round. So as you finish up, we'll give you a few minutes to go ahead and submit your answers through that link. Yeah, we should really think about some music next time.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
All right. Hopefully you got your answers in. Brian, you want to take it?
Sure, thanks so much. All right, question 9. So the landmark case that established students' rights to free speech in schools was Tinker versus Des Moines. And it was about students during the Vietnam War in 1969 wanted to wear these black armbands to school to protest the war. And it's really known because the Supreme Court, the important language and rule that they said was that students do not shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate. And in particular, that students and schools have a right to free speech, both within school and outside of school, as long as the speech does not cause a substantial disruption to the learning environment. Next slide. So this is a little bit more about what that substantial disruption might mean. So schools can punish you for saying the F word in the middle of class, screaming fire. This is like the famous thing about like yelling fire in a crowded theater, It's not protected by the First Amendment if you're causing harm and disruption to a lot of other people. And also calling a student a homophobic slur is also something. So the school you don't have an absolute right to free speech. So not everything you say is protected. If you're offending or like especially hurting someone else with your words, or just saying something that's profane or obscene, generally you do have a right, like in the world at large, to say the F word. There actually was a famous Supreme Court case. Someone had the F word on their jacket as they were going into a courthouse, and the Supreme Court said that was okay. But in schools, the school does have, they can actually limit it a little bit more, like you saying the F word in class. And then also, yeah, so the school district can adopt a policy that prohibits like all words on clothing. So some schools will have like a ban on all words at all, so that you have to wear like plain clothing, like just colors. But if your school lets you wear text on your shirts, then they can't discriminate the content of that text, as long as it's not profane, obscene, related to alcohol or drugs. So shirts like gay okay, trans okay, any other kind of LGBTQ rights shirts you want to wear, those are allowed if your school district allows other text on clothing. And those are real examples. There was a principal who tried to ban 7th grade students from wearing gay okay shirt, and they had to back down because the policy was letting people wear other shirts. Next. So this is related to the free speech issues and is like very big right now, is that especially as we are doing everything virtually, parents, students, and others often don't realize that what you say outside of school, whether it be on Zoom, on TikTok, whatever, the school district can still actually take action and discipline students. So the key test we talked about from Tinker is that they can respond to speech as anything that causes a substantial disruption to the school environment. So that would include things like cyberbullying. And this is actually generally good for LGBTQ students, because if someone is harassing you, texting you, Snapchatting you, and treating you poorly and being mean to you, bullying you, you can report that to your school and they can actually take action, even though all that conversation is occurring in cyberspace. And the same thing for if you be careful what you say about teachers and staff, because if you say something that's construed as threatening, your school can take action against you. And it can even be broader than that too. I mean, you generally do have a free speech right to convey ideas and to say things. So you can even criticize your school, say like my school is discriminatory, I don't like my school, all those kind of things to be protected. But if you're doing something that's causing a substantial disruption that's not necessarily protected, like political speech, your school can take action against you. So it gets a little complicated, but we'll talk about the resources at the end, especially if you have like a free speech issue, feel free to reach out to us. Question 12. So students at your school have a right to all of the following. You can pass out Bibles and other religious materials, generally within the broader rules of like, if you can pass out anything at all, then you can pass out Bibles or religious materials. You can also lead a prayer or meditation, school prayer. If you're choosing to pray, your choice to do that is very protected right now. Or doing a historical report on the Buddha. And actually, Siddhartha Gautama, I think, is the same person as the Buddha. So we'll fix that next time, and we're going to say the Buddha, I think. But the one thing that people can't do, so your right to your own religion, you have under the First Amendment, you have a right to practice and exercise your own religion, but that doesn't include a right to use your religion to impose on someone else. So this is unfortunately a trend that we're seeing across the country, is that some people are trying to use their faith against LGBTQ people and LGBTQ students. It's called like religious refusals or religious exceptions, or even people who are government officials like Kim Davis, who is a county clerk in Kentucky. She's an elected government official whose job is it to give marriage licenses to people. But she said, well, my faith prevents me from treating LGBTQ people equally. So that's not okay. And we've pushed back on that in court. And actually Kim Davis, that was an ACLU case, she lost her case and was sued because your own religion doesn't allow you to hurt other people or discriminate against other people. Next slide. Question 13, if you organize a protest or walkout at your school that causes you to miss class, you can be punished the same as if you miss class for any other reason. So this was really big. I don't know if you all remember last year and the year before, there were a lot of walkouts and student protests, especially the March for Our Lives, following mass shootings, that people were walking out a lot all across the country. And so you have a right to walk out and participate in protests, but you can be disciplined the same as if you miss class for any other reason. They can't punish you more than you normally would be, because say if they don't like the protest or they disagree with your message, they can't punish you extra, but they can like give you an absence or a tardy, whatever the normal practice is. Question 14, if you are bullied or harassed by other students, you should not fight back and call these students names. Bullying and harassment is very endemic across the state. It's something that so many people go through and experience. And I think it's one of the hardest issues that we see. Legally, the school district, I told you earlier that every school district has a really good policy. They have very good language in their policies about bullying, cyberbullying, harassment, but they're typically very bad at taking actions to actually protect students. So legally, schools are required to take action if you report it. If the school doesn't know about it, then they're not legally required to respond or do anything. So that's why it is very important, C, to tell a school district official what happened, because if you don't tell a teacher or a counselor or principal what went down, they're not going to know about it and they can't take any response, and they're also legally not even required to respond unless it's something like egregious that they themselves see or know about. It's also very important to record and document what happens, and then also looking out for allies and friends who will support you. So the definition of bullying and cyberbullying involves when there's a power imbalance. Typically, the definition of bullying is that someone who is in power is like using that power or privilege to hurt someone else. And so that's where, as an ally, a teacher, an advocate, you can come into the equation and try to remove that power differential. That if a bully sees multiple people all standing up and saying, no, it's not cool to call someone gay in a pejorative sense, or to make fun of using the wrong pronouns for your trans classmate. If multiple people and a teacher or counselor get involved, they can erase that power imbalance and stand up, and that'll help resolve the situation. One thing, unfortunately, we often see is that it's really, really easy when someone insults you, bullies you, attacks you, to fight back or to say things that also like maybe threatening to them. But so many times we see the person being punished who actually was the person being bullied. So that's why being very careful, even though in that moment, so many people react and say like, well, I want to fight back for myself. I'm going to, throw a punch, or I'm going to say something that's like maybe threatening. But then that student's getting punished, even though they were the one who originally was being bullied. And even though the school is required to take action against the bully, they can also take action against you. So just FYI, the one thing we encourage people not to do is to fight back. Don't say anything. Just report it and try to resolve that power imbalance in other ways. Question 15. In every Texas public school district, you have a right to all of the following except B, protesting and disrupting a school board meeting to change your policies. So you do have a right to always attend your school board meeting and to address the school board, which is a very powerful tool that a lot of students don't realize. Every school board meets once a month, and they accept public comments. Usually students and parents don't often go to these meetings, and no one even gives public comments, but you have a right to go and testify for a couple minutes and talk about any issues you really care about. So it's a very powerful tool, but you can't actually disrupt the meeting. So you can't like talk out of order, or like you have to let the meeting proceed, but you'll be given an opportunity to participate. And then the A talks about filing an official complaint. So every district across the state also has a complaint process. If you're discriminated against, if you're bullied, if you're harassed, you have a right to file a complaint, which it's just a simple document you can send via email to the principal, telling them what happened, and you're actually entitled to a hearing. A hearing or like informal meeting with the principal and then they actually have to put in writing the school district is legally required to respond to you and to address your problem. They're not required necessarily to address it in the way you want, but they have to hear you, listen to you, and then take some kind of action. And one thing to note about the complaint process is often there's a deadline that you have to file your complaint within 15 business days. So just FYI, if something does happen to you, you should reach out to us or file your complaint quickly to make sure you don't miss the deadline. C talks about recording video. You do have a right to record video if you're allowed to use your phone and in a public space. So obviously you don't have a right to record video wherever you want. Like if you're in a locker room or bathroom, like that's not allowed usually. But if you're in a public hallway, if you're in a classroom where there are other students and your teacher and you're allowed to have your phone on you, it's okay for you to record. But if school district policy says you can't have your phone, then you should be following the school district policy because that might supersede it. And then you're also allowed to criticize your school on the internet or on the media, which can be a very powerful tool. I want to add that a lot of student activists, when they see something discriminatory, like addressing grooming code or the school is not allowing fair bathroom access, people will post on Twitter, or Instagram, or even TikTok, and it'll go viral. And then I've seen schools get very embarrassed and actually make substantive policy changes because young people are criticizing them on the internet. So it can be a very powerful tool. Question 16, if you are continually facing problems at your school and feel like you're being discriminated against, you should do all of the above. So researching and knowing what your rights are, like you're already a step ahead of the curve by coming today to participate in this trivia and watching this. B, reading your student handbook and your school policies. They look really boring, but they're also very important. And like I said, there are sometimes strict deadlines that you need to know about. And so if something happens to you, I really recommend looking at your student handbook, even before something happens to you, just knowing what the rules are and the regulations and knowing what your policies are, because you can also push to change these policies. So one thing you can look is, do your policies include LGBT students? Do they treat people equally? If not, we're planning in the next couple months at the ACLU of having future sessions and some kind of toolkit that could actually help you push to change some of these policies. So by filling out the form, if you click the adding yourself to our email list, you might get more information on that in the future. And then you can always go to our website, and if you didn't click that, you can still sign up for our email list through aclutexas.org. And then C, we already mentioned, it's really important to tell other people what happened to you so that the school can take action, and people like ACLU can also maybe help. So this is just a cheat sheet if you feel like your rights have been violated, to just stay calm. Remember, you have rights. Don't resist or directly disobey faculty, staff, even if someone's telling you to do something that you don't think is, use your best judgment. There are some things that you might want to disobey in the moment, but often the way the complaint process works is like you can complain about it later. So we try to de-escalate the situation and not escalate it. Document everything. Often, if you're complaining about something that happens to you, your child, your friend, putting it in writing can be very helpful. Recording it over email, even if someone has a conversation with you, maybe write it down, take notes. You can then use those notes later to refresh your memory. And then you have a right to make a formal complaint and also reach out to us. So yay, that's it.
We did it. Good job, everyone. Thank you so much for participating. Hopefully you've already submitted all of your answers, and we'll get back to the winners through email if you so choose to give us that information. Again, it is totally optional, so you don't have to provide that information if you don't want to. But if you so choose, we'll be able to send the winners some sort of swag, probably a t-shirt. So thank you all so much for participating. Now, if you all have any questions or anything like that, you can ask them in the chat and we'll respond. I actually can't see the chat without stop sharing the screen.
It doesn't look like there's anything in the chat at the moment, but yeah, if people want to ask questions, they definitely can do so while I'm talking. But I wanted to ask, so if someone feels like their rights have been violated and they feel like there is legal precedent to show that their rights have been violated, but they don't want to sue, they don't want to contact the ACLU, what should you do? Because I know there have been instances in my school, for example, where there's been something that's definitely illegal, but going through the whole process of a lawsuit would take a lot of time and energy and resources that people don't necessarily have. So can you sort of just speak to some of the other avenues for students to get justice in their schools?
Yeah, definitely. It's a great question. So thankfully, in like about 99% of situations or more, can usually be resolved without a lawsuit. So people like Gavin Grimm are, doing this kind of impact litigation and like kind of going up to the Supreme Court and trying to change the law. But once laws are established, then you can resolve it much more informally. So we talked about trying to resolve it kind of at the lowest level possible. So usually we recommend going to like a teacher or counselor, a parent or friend. Depending on the situation, it might be something that if like one teacher is using the wrong pronouns, there are some resources on our website, and you can always reach out to us for more resources, or there's a bunch on the internet now from other different LGBTQ groups, and you can sometimes just show them and say, look, actually, oftentimes teachers don't know that they're legally required to use people's affirming pronouns, but you can take these resources and show them and say, actually, here it is. Then if that teacher refuses, that's often when we would go to like the principal. And sometimes if the principal, or I always recommend finding whoever at your school like you think might be most supportive. If ideally there's someone who like is willing to listen to you and maybe help. If there's no one, which is sometimes the case, unfortunately, that's when you might want to consider the more formal complaint. And you can reach out to us. So a lot of when people reach out to us, most of the time, we're not filing lawsuits, we're actually filing these complaints. So they're kind of, it's like a step significantly below a lawsuit. It's just an informal meeting where we have with the principal, we talk about what happened. We also educate them because often the schools don't always know what their legal obligations are. So we're pushing them to change their policies or to treat people better. And often they are willing to negotiate and comply. Sometimes it really helps if you have an attorney or advocate with you. Oftentimes they'll resolve issues if just students go talk to them, but sometimes you might need to reach out to us to have that. But just because you reach out to us doesn't mean we're going to file a lawsuit. We obviously would never do that also without someone's permission and them wanting to do it, but it's extremely rare as well. Most things can be resolved through other mechanisms.
Are students in private and charter schools protected under these laws too?
Most students in charter schools are protected by the same federal laws. They're usually considered public. Private schools, it depends a little bit on the funding. So Title IX applies to any institution receiving federal funding. Even if they receive $1 of federal funding, Title IX would apply. That's one of the big sources of protections. But some things are a bit different, like the Equal Access Act, for example, that protects people's right to form a GSA. That typically doesn't apply to private schools. And also the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, because the private school is not a government actor, the Constitution does not apply. There are still some protections in Texas law. So the Texas Education Code applies to all schools, private or public. And there are some protections there, but they're not as strong. So most of the slides and questions today were about Texas public schools. Charter schools mostly are covered. Private schools a little bit less so, unfortunately, that there aren't quite as many protections, but still some. But yeah, feel free to reach out to us if you are in a situation where you're at a charter or private school and you want to learn more.
I had another question too, but I can't remember what it was.
Give it another couple of minutes, and if no one has questions, then we can wrap up.
I remembered. What kind of rights do students have when it comes to like sleeping arrangements on overnight trips?
That's a good one. There's not many court cases or things that are like clearly like established regarding that. We have had a couple matters where we've been able to negotiate with the school. So it really depends a lot on how, like, I mean legally, the student still has a right to be free from discrimination. So there's like a strong, like, if you feel like you're in this situation and you're being discriminated against, like you're being treated differently because you're trans or non-binary and you're being ostracized from your friends, definitely reach out to us, because the situation like we could work on. I've seen it where the school will like come to an agreement, like especially if they're already giving or the student already has like is using the gender affirming bathroom and locker room, then they're much more likely to say, oh, like the sleeping arrangements on a trip are fine too, especially when it's in a group and they're chaperones. But I have seen it come up where it's like an issue, especially if students aren't yet like using maybe the multi-user facilities that align with their gender. The school is usually a little less comfortable if they haven't already been in those spaces with their people of their affirming gender. But there's still arguments that like can be made depending on what the student and family prefer and want. But yeah, it's really sad to see, because we have seen some schools try to like if all your friends are staying together and then you're told you have to have a separate room or something, that really ruins the whole field trip.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. A lot of the questions that I've gotten in relation to a lot of these issues have definitely been around sports and extracurriculars and things. So yeah, that's really great input to have. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. I don't see any questions popping up in the chat, but I do want to plug our next upcoming session, which is this Monday at 6 p.m. It is called Finding the Missing Pieces of the Rainbow, Centering QT BIPOC History and Futures. So it's just a great opportunity to learn about all of the contributions that queer and trans, Black, and Indigenous people of color have contributed to the movement. And we'd also love to hear everyone's feedback on this session. So our feedback form is linked in the chat. Yeah, so please do that. As they said on the form where hopefully you submitted your answers, you can check the box to sign up for the ACLU's email list. And also, if you have further questions, please feel free to reach out to the email addresses on the screen.
Thanks so much for being here with us, y'all. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you all. This was awesome. And yeah, the whole thing. Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Bye.
Thanks, y'all.